Welcome back to the deep dive. If you are joining us as a learner today, we are so glad you're here because we are looking at a single night in October.
Specifically October of 539 BCE.
Right, 539 BCE, the fall of Babylon. And I mean, what makes this specific historical pivot so fascinating isn't just the geopolitical shockwave of it.
Though that was massive.
So completely massive. You have this impregnable empire collapsing practically overnight. But it's really about how the historical records of that single night overlap in these just bizarre, almost eerie ways.
Yeah, it's a historiographical puzzle that is honestly thrilling to untangle.
Because you have the most fortified city in the ancient world falling to the Achaemenid Persian Empire without protracted siege, without battering down the outer walls, and largely without a fight.
Which breaks every rule of ancient warfare.
Exactly. And the sources we have detailing how this happened shouldn't naturally align. I mean, they come from entirely different intellectual and cultural universes.
We really do. We have a stack of sources on the table today that under normal circumstances would never corroborate one another.
Run through the stack for us. What are we looking at?
Okay, so first you have the Greek historical tradition, primarily Herodotus writing in the 5th century BCE.
The father of history.
Right, or the father of secular history. Anyway, he's traveling, gathering accounts, trying to rationalize the events of the past without necessarily defaulting to the gods did it.
Okay, so that's the Greek side.
Then you have the administrative bureaucracy of the vanquished empire itself, the Neo-Babylonian Empire.
The people who actually lost the city.
Exactly. Specifically, we have the Nabonidus Chronicle, which is this cuneiform text that just dryly logs state events. It's a bureaucratic ledger.
No drama, just the facts.
Precisely. And finally, we have the theological and poetic texts of the Hebrew prophets. So Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Daniel.
Which is a completely different genre.
Entirely different. These are texts driven by a profound theological motive, written by a subjugated, exiled people.
So we have an outsider's secular history, an insider's state log, and the theological poetry of an exiled minority.
Yes. And the mission of our deep dive today is to explore the fact that all three of these distinct traditions snap together to describe the exact mechanics of Babylon's fall.
Which is incredibly rare.
It's almost unheard of in the study of antiquity.
And for you, the learner, this is why you should care. This isn't just dusty ancient history. It is an absolute masterclass in how different vantage points can fit together perfectly like puzzle pieces to reveal a multidimensional picture of an event that shifted the entire world.
It really challenges how we read history and how we read theology.
Okay, let's unpack this. To really understand how these sources map onto each other, we need to strip away the mythos of Babylon for a second and look at the sheer physical reality of the city.
The city that Cyrus the Great was trying to conquer.
Right. We know the legends of the walls. I mean, the classical claims say chariot races could be held on top of them.
Which, even if slightly exaggerated, speaks to the psychological impact those walls had on the ancient world.
So, logistically speaking, why was a direct assault considered mathematically impossible for the Persian army?
It basically comes down to a combination of geography, engineering, and just massive resource hoarding.
The Babylonians were preppers.
Extreme preppers. The Neo-Babylonian Empire under Nebuchadnezzar II and his successors had transformed Babylon into a fortress of unprecedented scale. You have a massive double wall system.
Double walls?
Yes, and between these walls was a moat filled with water diverted from the Euphrates River.
So you have to cross a river just to get to the first wall.
And the walls themselves were constructed of baked brick and bitumen, which made them incredibly resilient to the siege engines of the day. A battering ram is just going to bounce off that.
That sounds like a nightmare for an attacking army.
It gets worse, because the most critical factor wasn't just the walls, it was the provisions. Babylonian agricultural engineering and their immense storage capacities meant the city could theoretically withstand a siege for years.
Decades even, according to some sources.
Right, and Cyrus is leading this massive coalition army. He faces a logistical nightmare.
Because you have to feed your own guys.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You can't just park an ancient army outside a city for half a decade without your own supply lines collapsing. You'd face disease, starvation, or rebellions back home. A siege of attrition was a losing gambit for the Persians.
So Cyrus can't starve them out, and he can't batter the walls down?
They stuck.
Which brings us to Herodotus, Book 1 of his histories. Herodotus points out an engineering flaw that a former Babylonian ruler, Queen Nitocris, had inadvertently left behind.
A fascinating detail.
Walk me through the actual engineering of what Cyrus decided to do here, because it is an audacious piece of tactical hydraulic engineering.
So you have to visualize the Euphrates River. It was the lifeblood of Babylon. And it didn't just run alongside the city, it flowed directly through the center, bisecting Babylon into two distinct halves.
Like Paris and the Seine.
Good analogy. Now, to protect the city from a naval assault, or just someone swimming in, the Babylonians had built massive walls along the riverbanks inside the city.
So even if you get into the river, you're still walled off from the streets.
Right. And these internal walls had heavy bronze gates that allowed citizens to access the water from the streets during peacetime.
Okay, got it.
Herodotus details that generations earlier, Queen Nitocris had initiated a massive infrastructure project. To slow the current of the river and to build a bridge across the two halves of the city, she had this massive artificial basin dug upstream.
Like a reservoir.
Exactly. It was a drainage marsh designed to temporarily hold the diverted waters of the Euphrates while they built the bridge.
So Cyrus essentially looks at their own defensive and infrastructural blueprints and realizes the weapon to defeat them is already built.
Precisely. The tool for their destruction was sitting right upstream. According to Herodotus, Cyrus positioned a portion of his army where the river entered the city and another portion where it exited.
The shock troops.
Yeah. He then took his non-combatant troops upstream to that basin Nitocris had built. And under the cover of darkness, they broke the banks and diverted the mighty Euphrates into this massive marsh.
Which would have an immediate and catastrophic effect on the water levels inside the city.
The drop was drastic. Herodotus tells us the water level of the Euphrates flowing through the city's channel dropped to roughly thigh depth.
Thigh depth? You can just walk through that.
Exactly. It transformed a raging, uncrossable moat into a muddy, shallow road leading directly under the impregnable outer walls.
So the Persian shock troops waiting in the darkness, they just squelch right through the mud and wade into the city.
Without touching a single outer brick.
But wait, lowering the water is only half the problem, right? You still have those internal river walls and the bronze gates Herodotus mentioned.
Right, the ones lining the river inside the city.
Because if the Persian army weighs in, they are essentially walking into a giant trench. They'd be sitting ducks for archers on the riverbank walls if those bronze gates were locked.
They would be trapped. And this is where the human element, the cultural context, makes the military tactic viable.
The psychological side of it.
Yes. Herodotus notes that if the Babylonians had been aware of what Cyrus was doing, they could have easily locked the bronze gates leading down to the river. They could have trapped the Persians in the riverbed and slaughtered them from above.
But they didn't.
They didn't. And the reason they didn't is that the entire city was engulfed in a massive religious and cultural festival.
Partying.
They were completely distracted.
Oh.
The negligence of the festival is what makes the river diversion work.
It's the perfect storm of hubris.
It is the ultimate manifestation of imperial overconfidence. The city was so vast, and the Babylonians felt so secure behind those outer walls that they completely neglected their internal security.
They thought they were untouchable.
Herodotus records a detail that speaks volumes about the scale of Babylon. He says the outer districts of the city had already been breached and captured by the Persians, while the people in the center of the city continued their drinking and dancing.
They had no idea.
Completely unaware that their empire had just ended. They didn't find out until the Persians were literally at their doors.
It's a cinematic narrative. But I do want to push back on Herodotus for a moment here.
You do.
Because he's writing roughly a century after these events. He's Greek, he loves a good dramatic narrative, and he has a tendency to lean into the moral failings of Eastern empires.
The whole drunken hubris leading to ruin trope.
Exactly. How do we know this isn't just a convenient moral fable? What do the internal contemporary Babylonian records actually say?
That is the necessary critical question. If we only had Herodotus, we might categorize this as heavily embellished historical legend.
Right.
But this is where the Nabonidus Chronicle becomes vital.
The state ledger.
Yes. The Chronicle is a contemporary cuneiform tablet. It is an official administrative state log of the Neo-Babylonian Empire. It doesn't care about moral fables. It doesn't care about a compelling narrative.
It's just timestamps and data.
Exactly. It simply records the movements of kings, the dates of festivals, and the outcomes of military campaigns in a very dry, bureaucratic formula.
So what does the state log say about October 539 BCE?
The Chronicle confirms the exact timeline and the startling nature of the fall. It notes that after Cyrus won a battle nearby at Opis, his forces approached Babylon.
Okay, so the army is at the gates.
And then it states that on the 16th day of the month of Tashritu, the army of Cyrus entered Babylon without a battle.
Without a battle. That is a stunning admission for an official state log.
It explicitly notes that the gates were not breached by force. and that there was no significant bloodshed within the city. Later it mentions that Cyrus himself entered the city and peace was declared.
So the administrative log says we lost the city without a fight. But wait, it doesn't mention the river diversion?
No, the chronicle does not detail the hydraulic engineering.
Why not?
Because it doesn't need to. It's a ledger of outcomes, not tactics.
Yeah.
But the value of synthesizing these sources is that they answer different questions.
I see.
The Nabonidus Chronicle confirms the what, which is a sudden, bloodless capture of an impenetrable fortress.
And Herodotus provides the how.
Exactly, the mechanical how, the diversion of the river that allowed the army to bypass the defenses entirely.
So the Greek narrative of a tactical stealth entry perfectly explains the Babylonian bureaucratic record of a city falling without a battle.
They fit together flawlessly.
Which brings us to the most complex and debated sources in our stack, the Hebrew prophets.
This is where the convergence gets really fascinating.
We're pivoting from Greek historiography and Babylonian administration to ancient Israelite theology. So let's look at the book of Isaiah, specifically chapters 44 and 45.
We need to set the context here because it's crucial.
Right. The Israelites have been conquered. Their temple in Jerusalem was destroyed in 586 BCE, and they are living as captives in exile in Babylon.
Yes, so in Isaiah 44 and 45, we find an incredibly sophisticated theological polemic.
It's not just pretty poetry.
Not at all. It is a direct challenge to the Babylonian worldview. The Babylonians believed their patron deity Marduk controlled the cosmos and that their empire was eternally secure.
And the author of Isaiah is pushing back on that.
Heavily. The text counters this by positioning YHWH, the God of Israel, as the sole sovereign over history and creation. And the text does this through highly specific cosmological claims.
Okay, let's break down those claims, because the language here is where the hairs on the back of your neck start to stand up.
It is chilling.
In Isaiah 44.27, the text features YHWH issuing a command directly to the waters.
The Hebrew text reads, Haumar latzila karavi v'narotayich oriv. Who says to the deep, be dry, and I will dry up your rivers?
I will dry up your rivers.
Yes. The word used for the deep, kola, echoes ancient Near Eastern motifs of chaotic waters. But here, those waters are entirely subjugated to a divine command.
They are being bossed around by God.
And the verb ovrus, meaning be dry, is an imperative. It implies an immediate mechanical effect.
Now, when you read, I will dry up your rivers, right alongside Herodotus detailing the literal diversion of the Euphrates, I mean, it is a stunning alignment.
It shifts from being a vague metaphor about God's power over nature to a precise description of the exact military tactics Cyrus used.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. The text doesn't stop at the rivers. It actually names the conqueror.
It does. In the very next verse, Isaiah names Cyrus.
By name.
By name. He calls him God's shepherd, who will fulfill God's purpose, specifically regarding the rebuilding of Jerusalem.
Which is wild.
Okay.
And then as we cross into Isaiah 45.1, the language elevates to a level that is structurally shocking in the context of the Hebrew Bible.
Cyrus is explicitly called YHWH's anointed.
The Hebrew word is Mashiach, right? From which we get Messiah.
Correct. And the use of Mashiach here is a massive lexical anomaly.
Why is it anomalous?
Because throughout the entirety of the Hebrew Bible, this term is almost exclusively reserved for Israelite kings like David or consecrated high priests. It denotes someone uniquely empowered by God for a redemptive task within the covenant.
So to apply the title Mashiach to a Gentile, a pagan Achaemenid king who didn't even worship YHWH.
It is a radical theological statement. It signifies that God's sovereignty is so absolute that he will use a foreign emperor as his functional instrument to execute justice on Babylon and liberate his people.
And the text gets even more specific about how this anointed king will conquer. Isaiah 45 says God will go before Cyrus to open doors before him so that gates will not be shut.
Gates that will not be shut.
Oh, I mean, come on.
Again, if we map this back onto the physical reality described by Herodotus, the alignment is flawless.
Because when the Persian troops waded through the drained riverbed, their entire operation relied on those internal bronze river gates being left open.
Left open and unguarded by the reveling Babylonians. The prophetic text isolates the exact two vulnerabilities that led to the city's fall: the dried river and the unshut gates.
Now, to be rigorous about this, we have to address the dating of Isaiah. Because if you know your history, if Isaiah wrote this in the 8th century BCE, he is predicting a man's name and a highly specific hydraulic military tactic 150 years before it happens.
Which is a massive claim.
Right. So how does modern scholarship handle this text?
This raises an important question. And it is one of the most significant debates in biblical scholarship. We have to lay out both frameworks impartially.
Let's start with the conservative view.
So the conservative view, which is deeply rooted in historical Jewish and Christian tradition, maintains the unity of the book of Isaiah. In this framework, the 8th century prophet Isaiah of Jerusalem is the author of the whole thing.
Okay.
For scholars who hold this view, the specific naming of Cyrus and the details of the conquest are viewed as genuine predictive prophecy.
A miracle, essentially.
Yes, a miraculous demonstration of divine foreknowledge designed specifically to authenticate YHWH's sovereignty over the Babylonian gods when it finally came to pass.
So the argument is that God deliberately gave Isaiah the name and the tactic a century and a half in advance to prove a point to the exiles later on.
Yes. And we have an interesting historical footnote here from the 1st century Jewish historian Josephus.
Oh, right. I love this detail.
In his Antiquities of the Jews, Josephus records a tradition that Cyrus was actually shown these prophecies in Isaiah after he conquered Babylon.
Think about that for a second.
According to Josephus, reading his own name in a centuries-old Hebrew scroll is what provoked Cyrus to issue his famous decree, allowing the Jewish exiles to return to Jerusalem.
It's just an incredible image. The most powerful man in the world being handed a scroll by a subjugated people that essentially says, our God planned your victory 150 years ago.
It is a powerful tradition.
But there is a counter-argument to the 8th century dating. What does the critical or Deutero-Isaiah view argue?
So the critical view, which has been the consensus in secular academia since the late 19th century, argues that chapters 40 through 55 of Isaiah were not written by the 8th century prophet.
They split the book.
Yes. They point to distinct shifts in vocabulary, theological focus, and historical perspective.
Yeah.
In this view, an anonymous prophet, often called Deutero-Isaiah or 2nd Isaiah, wrote these chapters during or immediately after the Babylonian exile in the 6th century BCE.
So the author is a contemporary of Cyrus. They are watching the geopolitical tectonic plates shift in real time.
Exactly. The critical view classifies these texts as vaticinium ex eventu, which means prophecy after the fact, or at the very least prophecy written by someone who was already witnessing Cyrus's meteoric rise and the imminent collapse of Babylon.
Okay, so they're writing about what they see happening.
Right. They argue the text is a brilliant piece of theological commentary interpreting contemporary geopolitical events through the lens of YHWH's covenant loyalty.
But here's what fascinates me about this debate. Regardless of which side you land on, whether it's a 150-year prediction or contemporary theological reflection, the precision of the historical mechanics in the text doesn't change.
That is the critical synthesis here. The text demonstrates a profound awareness of the exact vulnerabilities of Babylon.
Because a generic conqueror trope would just say, God shattered the mighty walls of Babylon.
Exactly. But the text doesn't say that. It specifically targets the rivers and the gates.
Yeah.
It shows that the Hebrew author, whenever they were writing, understood the precise hydraulic and security failures that brought down the empire.
Corroborating Herodotus completely.
Completely.
Okay, let's move to our next prophetic source, because Isaiah isn't the only one dissecting this event. We have the prophet Jeremiah.
Yes.
Chapters 50 and 51 of Jeremiah make up the longest oracle against any foreign nation in the entire prophetic corpus. It is massive, and it is relentlessly focused on Babylon.
The length and intensity of Jeremiah 50 and 51 reflect the sheer trauma of the Babylonian conquest of Judah in 586 BCE.
It's a very raw text.
Very raw. Jeremiah is writing a highly structured, deeply poetic pronouncement of divine judgment. The oracle explicitly links the impending destruction of Babylon to its extreme arrogance, its idolatry, and its brutal, unyielding oppression of the Jewish exiles.
And when you analyze the thematic parallels between Jeremiah's poetry and the historical mechanics of 539 BCE, the connections are unavoidable.
They really are. Jeremiah leans heavily into the motif of drought. He repeatedly uses phrases that focus on the water.
Give us some examples.
In Jeremiah 50.38, he says, "A drought upon her waters, that they may be dried up." And in 51.36, "I will dry up her sea and make her fountain dry."
Again, the focus is entirely on the water system, not the walls.
Linguistically, this is fascinating. The Hebrew text uses words like yabush and dereb, meaning dry or desolate, and it frequently pairs these with verbs in the hefel stem.
Which means what in Hebrew?
The hefel stem in Hebrew grammar denotes causative action. The drying isn't just a natural weather phenomenon, it is an actively caused event.
You mentioned earlier in our prep the idea of Halidean transitivity. Walk me through that. How does the grammar of Jeremiah actually function as a theological statement?
Sure, so Halidean transitivity is a framework from systemic functional linguistics.
Sounds heavy.
It's just a way of analyzing how the grammar of a clause assigns roles to the participants. It looks at who is the actor doing the process and who's the goal receiving it.
Okay, that makes sense.
When we apply this discourse analysis to the Hebrew text of Jeremiah 50 and 51, a stark pattern emerges. Throughout the oracle, the grammar consistently positions YHWH as the dominant, inescapable actor.
He is the one driving the action.
He is executing the material processes. He is doing the drying. He is rousing the Medes. He is bringing the devastation.
Yeah, Babylon.
Babylon is reduced to the passive recipient.
They are just having things done to them.
Precisely. The impregnable empire is grammatically positioned as the goal. It is the passive object of divine justice, and Israel is positioned as the beneficiary.
So the linguistic structure itself subverts the geopolitical reality of the 6th century BCE.
Exactly. To the naked eye, Babylon was the actor, the dominant force in the world. But Jeremiah's grammar insists that YHWH is the one truly acting in history, actively dismantling the oppressor.
That is so cool, grammar as theology. And Jeremiah also anticipates the exact mood of the city's fall. He doesn't just predict the dried rivers. He describes Babylon's sudden collapse coming right in the middle of their arrogance.
Yes, he writes about them drinking and falling asleep.
Falling asleep, never to wake.
Jeremiah 51.39 and 57 specifically highlight this drunken revelry. He writes, "While they are inflamed, I will prepare them a feast and make them drunk, that they may become merry, then sleep a perpetual sleep."
Which perfectly mirrors the festival atmosphere that Herodotus described.
Where the city was captured while its inhabitants were engaged in a massive party. Jeremiah also explicitly names the Medes, the northern allies of the Persians, as the specific agents of this destruction.
The historical alignment between the prophet and the Greek historian is razor sharp.
It is. But for Jeremiah and for the exiled Israelites reading this isn't just a political regime change.
It isn't just about swapping a Babylonian emperor for a Persian one.
No. The theological implications are much deeper. The destruction of Babylon in Jeremiah is intricately tied to the promise of restoration.
The restoration of Israel.
Right. The text operates on a fundamental principle of biblical justice. The fall of the oppressor is the necessary mechanism for the liberation of the oppressed. YHWH is acting as the gizl.
The kin redeemer.
Yes. In ancient Israelite law, the ghouls was the family member responsible for buying back a relative from slavery or avenging their murder.
So God is stepping into the role of the family avenger for Israel.
Yes. The judgment on the arrogant empire is what clears the path for the realization of an everlasting covenant, or pre-trid olam. The dried riverbed isn't just a military vulnerability. It is the physical manifestation of God making a way for the exiles to return home and experience a renewed relationship with him.
Okay, we've been looking at this from a macro perspective so far. We've seen the Persian army outside the walls diverting the river. We've read the prophets predicting the fall from afar.
The 30,000-foot view.
Exactly. But do we have any record of what was happening inside the palace on that exact night? While the water was dropping in the Euphrates, what was the Babylonian leadership actually doing?
For that interior perspective, we turn to the book of Daniel, specifically chapter 5.
The writing on the wall?
Yes. This text gives us a first-hand, inside-the-walls account of the exact same night that Herodotus described from the outside.
Which is just wild to think about.
The chapter is written entirely in Imperial Aramaic, the lingua franca of the ancient Near East, and it is a masterpiece of dramatic narrative.
It really is a cinematic scene. You have to picture it. You are in the grand banquet hall. King Belshazzar is hosting a massive feast for 1,000 of his lords.
The elites of the empire.
Right. They are drinking wine surrounded by the opulence of Babylon. But Belshazzar makes a specific fatal decision. In the height of his drunken arrogance, he orders his servants to bring out the sacred gold and silver vessels that his predecessor Nebuchadnezzar had looted from the temple in Jerusalem decades earlier.
This is a crucial detail to understand. In the ancient Near East, when you conquered a nation, you took the idols and sacred vessels from their temple and placed them in the temple of your own god.
To show superiority.
Right. It was a physical demonstration that your god had defeated theirs. By bringing out the vessels of YHWH vessels consecrated for holy use and using them to drink wine while praising the Babylonian gods of gold, silver, bronze, iron, wood, and stone.
He's throwing a theological middle finger.
Belshazzar is committing the ultimate act of hubris. He is actively mocking the god of the very people who had prophesied his downfall.
He is throwing the trauma of 586 BCE back in their faces. And it is at this precise moment of supreme arrogance that the narrative shifts into the supernatural.
The turning point.
The text says that suddenly the fingers of a human hand appeared and began writing on the plaster of the wall illuminated by the lampstand.
The Aramaic narrative uses a participle to describe a sudden ongoing action. It emphasizes the immediacy and the absolute terror of the moment. Belshazzar is completely undone.
I mean, you would be too.
The text describes his face growing pale, his thoughts terrifying him, his hips, joints going slack, and his knees knocking together. The psychological collapse of the king mirrors the imminent collapse of his empire.
So he calls in all his Babylonian wise men, the enchanters, the astrologers, but none of them can read the writing. They are entirely paralyzed.
Which sets the stage for Daniel.
Right. Finally, the Queen Mother remembers Daniel, a Hebrew exile who had served a previous administration with incredible wisdom. Daniel is brought in, he refuses the king's desperate offers of wealth, and he delivers a searing rebuke.
Reminding Belshazzar of his place.
Reminding him that the god whose vessels he is desecrating is the one who holds his very breath in his hands. And then Daniel reads the writing. Mene tekel upharsin.
Now, the inability of the Babylonian wise men to read the text isn't necessarily because the letters were illegible, but because the meaning was deliberately obscured through a brilliant linguistic puzzle.
Break it down for us.
Mene tekel upharsin are Aramaic nouns. They are measures of weight or currency. A mina, a shekel, and half minas.
It's as if the divine verdict was delivered in the language of a tax auditor's ledger, a sequence of currency values.
Exactly. It completely subverted the mystical astrological expectations of the Babylonian court.
They are looking for complex omens in the stars, and God hands them a cosmic balance sheet.
Beautifully put. Daniel interprets these nouns by reading them as passive participles, verbs indicating a completed action that serves as a legal and scribal verdict.
So how does Daniel get from a ledger of weights to the end of an empire? Show us the wordplay.
He takes each word and unpacks its verbal root. He starts with mena. As a noun, it's a mina. But as a passive participle mena, it means numbered.
Numbered.
Daniel's interpretation to the king is direct. God has numbered the days of your kingdom and brought it to an end. The ledger is closed.
Wow. Next is tekel.
Next is tekel. As a noun is shekel. As a verb root tekel, it means weighed. Daniel tells Belshazzar, you have been weighed in the balances and found wanting or deficient.
You lack the moral and spiritual weight required to sustain your rule.
The ultimate judgment of an empire's character.
And then the last one.
And then comes the final masterful double meaning. Oharthan. The singular root is peres, meaning a fraction or a half mina. As a verb peres, it means divided.
Divided.
But the consonants for peres, PRS, are the exact same consonants used for the word Persia.
That is incredible. So it means divided, but it also points directly to the Persians.
Daniel's interpretation weaves the literal action and the geopolitical reality together perfectly. Your kingdom is divided, and it is given to the Medes and the Persians.
Numbered, weighed, divided.
Yeah.
And given to the Persians. It is a staggering linguistic verdict. And the chilling part is the timing of all this.
The synchronization.
Because while Daniel is delivering this translation in the banquet hall, the Persian soldiers are literally at that exact second wading through the mud underneath the city walls.
The verdict isn't a warning of some distant future.
It is a live broadcast of what is happening right outside the palace doors.
Exactly.
But before we talk about the immediate aftermath of that night, there is a historical puzzle piece in Daniel 5 that I want to explore. Because for a long time, historians used a specific detail in this chapter to argue that the book of Daniel was historically inaccurate.
Yes, the controversy over the third ruler. It's one of the most fascinating examples of archaeology vindicating a textual detail.
Right, so set the scene for this puzzle.
When Belshazzar is terrified by the writing, he offers a massive reward to anyone who can read it. He promises to clothe them in purple, put a gold chain around their neck, and make them the third ruler in the kingdom.
And for centuries, critics looked at that and asked, why the third ruler? If Belshazzar is the king of Babylon offering his highest reward, shouldn't he make the person the second ruler essentially his right-hand man?
It seemed like an obvious mistake.
The assumption was that the author of Daniel didn't actually know how the Babylonian court functioned.
That was the prevailing academic consensus for a long time. Historians knew from other classical sources that Nabonidus was the last official king of the Neo-Babylonian Empire.
Not Belshazzar.
Right, Belshazzar wasn't even recognized as a king in the Greek sources. So Daniel 5 calling Belshazzar king and offering the third position seemed like a blatant historical error written by someone much later who got their facts wrong.
But then archaeology caught up.
It did. In the 19th and 20th centuries, archaeologists unearthed cuneiform texts, most notably the Nabonidus Cylinder and the Heron Stele.
And what did they say?
These administrative documents revealed a completely unexpected political arrangement. King Nabonidus had essentially abandoned the capital city of Babylon.
He just left his empire.
Pretty much. He suffered from severe political and religious conflicts with the priests of Marduk. So he voluntarily exiled himself to an oasis in Arabia called Taima for roughly a decade.
Leaving a massive power vacuum in Babylon.
But he retained the official title of king. The texts explicitly state, however, that he entrusted the kingship to his eldest son, Belshazzar, leaving him in Babylon to manage the army and the administration.
So Belshazzar was a co-regent.
Yes. He functioned as the king in Babylon, which is why Daniel accurately addresses him as such. But officially, he was the second ruler of the empire, subordinate only to his absent father.
So when Belshazzar offers Daniel the position of the third ruler, it's not a mistake at all. He literally cannot offer the second position because he's currently occupying it.
The third slot is the highest available post he has the authority to give.
That is amazing. A detail that critics assumed was an error turned out to be a mark of profound historical authenticity. The author of Daniel 5 knew the exact anomalous political structure of the Babylonian court in 539 BCE.
A structure that was lost to history for over 2 millennia until those cylinders were dug up.
And Daniel 5 concludes with brutal, immediate historical fulfillment. Verses 30 and 31 state, "That very night Belshazzar the Chaldean king was killed, and Darius the Mede received the kingdom."
That verse is the anchor point. It's where the theology of Daniel meets the history of Herodotus and the Nabonidus Chronicle.
The narrative aligns seamlessly. We have a city carousing in false security, blinded by arrogance, completely unaware that their empire has been weighed and found wanting, while an enemy creeps through its drained riverbed.
The transfer of power is sudden, it is definitive, and it occurs on the night of a feast.
Now, to maintain our academic rigor, we should briefly touch on the identity of Darius the Mede mentioned at the end of the chapter, because that is still a highly debated topic.
It is a complex historical puzzle. We know Cyrus the Great was the ultimate conqueror. So who was Darius the Mede?
Right.
Scholars have several theories, impartially speaking. Some argue it is an alternative royal title for Cyrus himself.
Taking a Median throne name.
Right. Others suggest it refers to Gubaru, the general, who, according to Babylonian records, actually led the troops into the city that night and was appointed governor of Babylon.
The boots-on-the-ground commander.
Yes. And another theory points to Cyaxares II, a Median king who was an ally of Cyrus. The specific historical identification remains debated in the academy.
But the overarching historical context, the sudden end of the regime, the transfer of power, the Medo-Persian alliance, and the taking of the city during a nocturnal festival is solidly corroborated across all our traditions.
Absolutely.
When you step back and look at the synthesis of all these sources, the philosophical implications are just staggering to me.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it really is.
We have Herodotus, a secular Greek historian trying to rationalize a military victory. We have the Nabonidus Chronicle, a dry, bureaucratic log of dates and troop movements. We have Isaiah and Jeremiah, Hebrew prophets, writing vast poetic oracles of cosmic judgment. And we have Daniel, an Aramaic court narrative detailing a supernatural intervention.
And the value of this convergence lies precisely in the independence of those sources.
They aren't copying each other.
Exactly. Herodotus was a Greek writing for Greeks. He had zero stake in proving Hebrew prophecies right. He likely had no idea the texts of Isaiah or Jeremiah even existed.
He's just doing his job as a historian.
He was simply trying to record the mechanics of how an impregnable city fell. He doesn't attribute any theological significance to the diversion of the Euphrates. He just records it as a brilliant piece of hydraulic engineering.
And that total lack of theological motive is what makes his corroboration so powerful.
It provides the physical scaffolding for the theological claims.
Let's do a final review of those direct parallels, because when you stack them up, the coherence is undeniable.
Let's hear them.
First, Isaiah says, God will command the deep, be dry and I will dry up your rivers. And Herodotus records Cyrus literally diverting the Euphrates River into a basin, draining the channel.
Perfect match.
Second, Isaiah says God will open doors before him so that gates will not be shut. Herodotus records that lowering the water exposed the internal river channels, rendering the bronze river gates useless and unguarded.
Again, matching physical reality.
3rd Jeremiah and Daniel describe a sudden shocking fall occurring right in the middle of a drunken feast, with the city's leaders rendered paralyzed or asleep. And Herodotus explicitly records the surprise attack succeeding precisely because the Babylonians were entirely distracted by a massive religious festival.
The secular history gives tangible reality to the prophetic poetry. The open, unguarded channels are the historical manifestation of the unshut gates.
And the surprise entry of the troops is the historical manifestation of the writing on the wall.
The coherence between these texts strongly argues against the idea that the biblical accounts are merely pious mythology divorced from reality. They're grounded in verifiable historical mechanics.
Even if a critical scholar maintains that texts like Isaiah were written after the fact, they still must grapple with the profound precision of the language.
It demonstrates that the biblical authors possessed an intricate knowledge of the exact vulnerabilities that brought down the empire, knowledge that secular historiography inadvertently ratifies.
So what does this all mean for you, the learner, listening to this today? Why does this ancient convergence matter to a modern audience?
Because it challenges how we view the recording of history. We're so accustomed to viewing history merely as a sequence of geopolitical maneuverings.
Just names, dates, and tactics?
We look at the military tactics, the moving of rivers, the festival calendars, the decisions of kings. But this convergence suggests a deeper architecture to historical events.
It demands that we consider a worldview where history is not just a series of random geopolitical collisions.
For the biblical authors, the God of Scripture is the Lord of history. A God who uses even pagan conquerors, naming them as his anointed instruments to accomplish redemptive purposes.
The geopolitical maneuverings are real, they are historical, but they are subordinate to a broader narrative.
A narrative of justice, liberation, and divine orchestration.
And from a canonical perspective, the events of 539 BCE ripple out through the rest of the biblical text. Babylon stops being just a city on the Euphrates and becomes something much, much larger.
Yes, Babylon becomes an archetype.
Walk us through that archetype.
Throughout the biblical narrative, beginning as far back as the Tower of Babel in Genesis 11 and crystallizing after the exile Babylon, stands as the ultimate symbol of the arrogant, idolatrous worldly empire.
It's the stand-in for human rebellion.
It represents any system that oppresses humanity, hoards power, and sets itself up in direct opposition to the divine order.
And the imagery of its fall in 539 BCE, specifically the vulnerability of its river, becomes the theological template for ultimate justice.
Exactly. This echoes all the way into the final book of the New Testament, the book of Revelation.
Oh, that's a great connection.
In Revelation 16, when the fall of the final worldly system is depicted, the author uses the exact same imagery we find in Herodotus and Isaiah. The text says the sixth angel pours out his bowl on the great river Euphrates, and its water is dried up to prepare the way for the kings from the east.
The historical hydraulic vulnerability of 539 BCE becomes the eschatological metaphor for the final collapse of human hubris.
The historical reality points toward a greater spiritual reality.
And for the Christian worldview, specifically, the figure of Cyrus takes on a profound significance.
He does. And a commanded Persian emperor functioning as a shepherd to free the captives of Israel and fund the rebuilding of their temple becomes a historical type.
A foreshadowing.
Yes, a foreshadowing of a greater deliverer. A Messiah who opens the gates of captivity, not through a clever military diversion of a river, but through the mechanism of death and resurrection.
It is a profound canonical synthesis moving from exile to return, from judgment to mercy. The early church fathers, figures like Justin Martyr and Irenaeus, explicitly viewed Cyrus as a type of Christ in his role as a liberator.
The God who weighed Belshazzar in the balances on the night of his feast, who numbered the days of an impregnable empire, is viewed as the same God who holds all of modern history in his hands.
Bringing every oppressive system to its appointed end.
Exactly.
What a monumental deep dive this has been. Let's just do a quick recap. We started with the sheer physical impossibility of a massive fortified metropolis.
The impenetrable walls.
We examined the precise hydraulic engineering detailed by a secular Greek historian.
Diverting the Euphrates.
We analyzed the dry, bureaucratic confirmation of a cuneiform state log.
Falling without a battle.
We dove into the cosmological claims of Isaiah and the grammatical theology of Jeremiah's drought motif.
God commanding the deep to be dry.
And we sat in the terrifying silence of Belshazzar's banquet hall, watching an Aramaic verdict appear on the plaster. Numbered, weighed, divided. All of these distinct voices from completely different cultures and centuries converging on a single fateful night in October 539 BCE.
It is the perfect, astonishing intersection of history and theology.
As we wrap this up, what is the final takeaway here?
As we conclude our analysis of these sources, I want to leave you, the listener, with a final thought to consider.
Okay, let's hear it.
We have spent this time examining how Babylon, the great impenetrable fortress, actually fell. It did not fall because its massive imposing walls were battered down from the outside.
The walls held.
It fell because its life source, the very river flowing right through its center, the thing that gave it life and security, was quietly turned against it. And it happened while its leaders partied in absolute arrogance, entirely convinced that their foundations were eternal and their walls were secure.
They were undone by the very infrastructure they thought protected them.
It forces a reflection on our own era. Consider the towering, seemingly impregnable empires, institutions, or systems of our modern world.
The ones we think are too big to fail.
The economic structures, the technological fortresses, the societal norms we assume will always be there. What are the unnoticed rivers flowing through the center of our modern world today?
That is a great question.
What are the underlying foundations we assume will always protect us? And what might happen if the waters of our own hubris were suddenly quietly diverted while we weren't looking?
That is a question that lingers long after the history books are closed. To our listeners, keep questioning, keep digging into the mechanics of the past, and we will catch you on the next deep dive.